bring people in. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just getting set up with the webcast and everything else set up. So just a note that we're going to quickly here go into broadcast mode. So if you don't want to be seen, turn off your video. I've left the video function turning on this. What am I even saying? You can turn on your video because this one might be a little more interactive than others. So please just know that. We'll get started here in just a minute. Oops. All right, let's get started here. Well, welcome back to those of you who are joining us again, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. My name is Max Haven, and I'm Canada Research Chair in Culture, Media, and Social Justice here at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay. And I'm co-director of the Reimagining Value Action Lab. And on behalf of the lab, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the final session of our Summer Institute on Conspiracies and Countergames. Today, we are joined by none other than Cassie Thornton, a social practice artist, who will be speaking about her project, The Hologram. And for the sake of both information and full disclosure, Cassie is the co-director of the Reimagining Value Action Lab. We work together at Rival and also on a project called the University of the Phoenix, and we are also partners. So full disclosure, this is not going to be a completely unbiased interview. But it does mean that I, as an interviewer, have kind of observed quite a bit about the project that she'll be speaking about today, which is the hologram. But briefly, before we begin there, a few notes about Cassie. So Cassie, as I mentioned, is a social practice artist, which for those of you unfamiliar with the currents in contemporary art means that rather than producing artifacts, rather than producing paintings or sculptures, Cassie might be described as a sort of sculptor of social circumstances, of human relationships. It's a form of art that evolved out of feminist art, activist art, conceptual art, and performance art. Cassie graduated with a master's degree, a Master of Fine Arts degree from the California College of the Arts in 2012 in social practice, and during that time focused on the theme of debt, doing, for instance, debt visualizations with her fellow students under the argument that, in fact, the CCA and other similar institutions were doing a better job at producing debt and debtors than they were at producing art and artists. Since that time, Cassie has been commissioned by art institutions and other strange funders around the world, and done a number of solo or collaborative works, including, as I was mentioning, debt visualizations, where she would work with people who are in debt in order to envision their debt as a kind of common architecture, a common problem, rather than a personalized worry. One of her projects, Give Me Cred, attempted to start an alternative credit reporting bureau that would allow a sort of peer-to-peer method for people to write one another credit reports rather than relying on huge alienating industries. One of her projects, the Poet Security Force, worked with private security guards to ask them to write poetry about what needs to be protected and what the private security industry was in fact protecting. She's led, including here at the Reimagining Value Action Lab, feminist economics yoga, and she's done institutional critique and installation work under the banner of something called Bad Support, which looked at the way in which arts institutions and many institutions in our society, in their attempts to provide support to the people who work in them or depend on them, actually provide a form of bad support, which kind of collapses in on them, both literally and metaphorically. And all of those activities led to the project that she's currently working on with a number of other people, some of whom are in the Zoom room with us, and I think will chime in a little later in our session here, called The Hologram. The Hologram is the subject of a recent book that Cassie published about a year ago, published under the Vagabonds imprint of Pluto Press. And very briefly, though Cassie, I'm sure we'll go into it in a little bit more detail, the hologram is a peer-to-peer health model where 4 people gather, perhaps in a Zoom room much like this, to learn about one another, to ask each other informed and intelligent questions, and to provide a kind of peer support and peer-to-peer healthcare in a moment of crisis. Welcome, Cassie. Thank you for joining us.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me.
So Cassie, what we'll do is I'll ask you some questions now, and then probably about halfway through the hour, I'll start opening it up to folks who are gathered here with us in the Summer Institute to pose questions to you as well. For those of you who are here in the Institute, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom room or simply type your question into the chat and I'd be happy to relay it to Cassie. And for those of you who are joining who are also members of the hologram, it would be wonderful to hear from you as well if you want to chime in at a certain point. But let's begin, Cassie, by talking a little bit about the origins of the hologram project. I wonder if you can tell us where this project came from, perhaps starting with your own experiences being an American and suffering under that system's vastly unequal healthcare system, and then your trips to Greece to study the solidarity clinics there.
Sure. Yeah, so let's see, the hologram, I mean, I think the important thing to say is, and something that Max kind of started to say, is that like a big part of, I think, where the hologram comes from is from spending a lot of time thinking about debt, and from being an anti-debt activist. So for a long time, I mean, even since I was a kid, I thought a lot about debt and the sort of sense of owing. And, you know, some of that debt is financial and some of it is not, some of it's bigger. And so I guess to me, in a way, like the hologram, most importantly, is a kind of antidote to spending many years revealing like the pain that debt causes, or the isolation and individualization that's created by living in a world that's organized around who owes who and who has power over who. And so I think in a weird way, like the hologram is, I feel so lucky because I feel like the hologram came because of being so intimate with debt. And one way that I was intimate with debt was as just a person that grew up in the United States, where any kind of medical care resulted in profound amounts of debt. And so I experienced the loss of life of people really close to me who just absolutely couldn't afford healthcare and went into extreme amounts of debt, which kept them from getting life-saving care that they needed. And then, so I'm very interested in those systems and how they're replicated socially and how they're replicated financially and how they're replicated politically, and then how we end up reproducing them ourselves without even knowing it. So because I was so interested and invested in like how debt exists and how we exist because of it in certain ways, I started to pay much more attention, maybe starting about a decade ago, in like international debt flows. And so it was really fascinating to me to watch what was happening in Greece in the early 2010s, when they were deemed bankrupt by the EU. And I think, you know, I was just completely floored to find out that the response that was happening in Greece was for many, many people to create free, totally free clinics all over Greece. And I think not only were they free clinics, they were often in squatted buildings, not always, but many. And lots of doctors and nurses and different types of healthcare workers, masseuses and dentists, acupuncturists, all volunteered their time to create fully free health clinics. And I, as an American person, as a person who only has experienced really private healthcare, very expensive healthcare, and even like in a weird way, had been raised to believe that the best healthcare would be the most expensive healthcare. I think I was just so moved by the idea of these professionals giving up their time and doing something even potentially illegal to create free care at their own, really at their own risk. And so this on its own is amazing. But then learning more, I found out that there was one particular clinic that was not only interested in giving free care, but they were also interested in giving better care, care that did not include many of the hierarchies that happen in most medical systems. And so this clinic, which to me was like a rumor that I heard about in Thessaloniki, there was this clinic and they were giving care, non-hierarchical care. And that all I heard was that when you were a patient, you went in and you were seen by a therapist and a social worker and a doctor at the same time, and that they spent 2 hours with you. That's all I knew. And so I went on a bit of a journey to Greece with a friend, another healthcare researcher. We went there and we found one of the people that ran this clinic or that worked on this particular project, which is called the integrative model, and found that it was at this place called the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, and it still exists. And that they were looking at how to give care in this way, with these three people really looking at the patients, but looking at them from all these different dimensions and really trying to ask them, like, what do you need from us? Like, what do you need in order to be healthy? And how can we support you in doing that? And it was like mind blowing to hear about that. After having 10 minutes with doctors my whole life who I couldn't afford, this was so revolutionary. It seemed so old and so new. So anyway, this little idea, which now I've spent a couple of years speaking with one of the people that work on it, named Frosa Morelli. I feel like we've taken that in the hologram and transformed it into something that's even more non-hierarchical, into something that we can do ourselves without space, without money. Well, actually, we have a little bit of money now, but we can talk about that in a second. Without space, without expertise, without professionals, without professionalization, we've developed a system where we can kind of take some of the lessons of what they were doing in the Social Solidarity Clinic of Thessaloniki, using the integrative model, and kind of like absorb it and do it our own way. And to create a bit of, I think, what Max is calling like a conspiracy, also maybe like a big alternate world of care, where care is done a little bit differently than any of us have ever experienced.
I want to come back to that question of alternative realities, games, conspiracies in a minute, but I wonder, just for those who are unfamiliar with the process, can you walk us through what a typical hologram meeting would look like and what happens?
Yeah. So the idea of the hologram is based on the idea that the person who is receiving care is powerful. And so we call that person the hologram. That person invites three people to support them, to come to regular meetings. And in a meeting, the person who is the hologram is asked lots and lots of questions by the three people supporting them. The three people supporting them we call the triangle. And one person asks the hologram questions about their physical well-being. So physical being the body, the home, the environment, the earth. Another person, the second person, asks them questions about their social well-being, their relationships, their work, their working relationships, their roommates, their relationships to social systems, maybe even finance, their relationship to money, maybe. The third person in the triangle asks them questions about their mental and emotional well-being. So their ideas, their feelings, their dreams, their beliefs. And the idea is that those things, they happen over maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours, and they happen regularly over a long period of time. So I am a hologram. I have 3 people that meet with me. At times we've met every week when my health has been bad. And at times we meet every 3 months, or even maybe sometimes we might meet every 6 months. But that we do that over time. So slowly the triangle members really get a sense of who I am in all these different dimensions. And so the idea is that over time, I have almost like a living medical record, like people that really know what I've been through. And so when a big decision comes up, when I need to maybe like decide whether or not to have an expensive surgery, or when I need to decide whether I want to move or whether I want to take a new job, there's 3 people that have been there with me for a while who can see my patterns and help me maybe make some decisions about like where I've been and where I want to go. And I think a really, so that's like what happens in the kind of micro, like one step bigger, one step back. The hologram is not necessarily, well, the hologram model necessitates that the hologram makes sure to support their triangle members to get support also. So I don't give back to my triangle members what they give to me. I don't turn around and say, and how are you? I say, how can I make sure that you're getting the support you need? And so the hologram model moves virally between people. And the idea is that we're working on creating like a culture of care, a culture of a different way of distributing labor that moves through people.
One of the things I love about the hologram project is that viral nature of it, and that it's, I mean, you are an artist, it kind of came out of your collaborations with others, but you know, within a few years, I believe, starting in 2022, you intend to make the hologram not your project, but something that's a kind of run collaboratively between the people who practice it, a kind of vast international conspiracy. And I think it's worth mentioning that now, you know, it's an interesting art project, but there are potentially hundreds of people practicing this already. And it's less of a project and more of a protocol in a certain way, in the sense that you've kind of given away for free the way to do it, the methodology, and people are encouraged to participate in holograms and form their own holograms. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on this series, to talk about how kind of acting conspiratorially can be a method of resistance, of care, of solidarity as well. I wanted to maybe begin by talking about that, by asking you why so many people mistake it for a pyramid scheme. You know, even when I've shared the topic, and you know, people have said, you know, are very suspicious of it. Where do you think the suspicion comes from? And yeah,
I love pyramid schemes, and this is absolutely an anti-capitalist pyramid scheme. So I think that people are correct, and like if anybody looks at the website, which is the hologram.xyz, you'll see that the whole thing is designed as like a series of inverted pyramids. And I think that the pyramid scheme is what's on people's minds when they think that there's something. I think that when it feels like there is a commodity that wants to be distributed through people, and like how to say it, I feel like they're right. I mean, I just feel like our training is that like if something is being given to you, it's probably a trick. Like if something is being offered to you that feels like it's going to augment your well-being, so often, especially in the United States, but now more and more everywhere, there's a profit motive underneath. And I think that most people haven't really had that many experiences where something that is branded, that looks cool, that sounds cool, is not a trick. And that we're not trying to somehow take something from them and skim off of the people that use the hologram and somehow like centralize the resources, like to somehow profit off of their attention. But actually, we really literally aren't. We really literally are just actually, it's a practice. And I think it creates such it's kind of so fun. And it's such like an inversion of like the expectations around care that I think the people that are really using it just actually want more people to use it because it's like, it's kind of more fun if more people do it. But yeah, so I guess I think that the idea that it is a pyramid scheme is like, it comes from people who have seen a pattern in society. And I completely agree with them. And if I was looking at it from the outside, I think I might see the same thing. And what is a pyramid scheme if you take out the desire to kind of centralize power or resources? So the dream of the hologram is that by 2023, it will be just like a decentralized thing. Like I like to think about it like a not abusive AA, where you have a protocol and
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous. So you have a protocol that anybody can sort of unravel for themselves in their communities, like cater it, like optimize it for themselves so that it works for them and their people and use it. And that's it. But I think, yeah, the other side of a pyramid scheme is that you assume that somehow, like, yeah, all of that energy is being used kind of against you in the end, where we just actually want to sort of like create a bunch of opportunities for people to create a different type of energy.
I want to link this to a discussion we were having a week ago with Rutgers University communications professor Jack Bradich. And in that interview, we talked about an article that he had written about the rise of far-right misogynist online social movements, notably the pickup artist phenomenon and the incel phenomenon. And one of the things that he sort of laid out for us is that we see a kind of new relationship between sort of very violent and misogynistic forms of patriarchy and sexism in a neoliberal moment where, you know, neoliberalism as a form of sort of extreme capitalism tells men especially, but really everyone that, you know, if you are an individualist, if you compete against everyone to succeed, if you try and impose your will on the world, you will sort of get what you want. And then of course, that's just simply not true for the vast majority of people. Most people don't get what they want in their life under capitalism, and their experience is one of oppression, exploitation, and misery, or at least incredible alienation. And his argument was that this experience of oppression, exploitation, alienation, and disenchantment leads to the kind of backlash, sort of hyper-masculine, patriarchal backlash cultures. Now, I wanted to bring that up because I think you approached the hologram and you created it through under the umbrella of a project you've been working on for a number of years called the Feminist Economics Department. You're not by training technically an economist, but why did you choose to work under the title of Feminist Economics Department, and how is the hologram a form of feminist economics?
So I think that the calling myself the Feminist Economics Department, or it's not exactly that I called myself it, but instead of having projects that were just by Cassie Thornton, it would be by the Fed. I think I was trying to acknowledge the fact that like whatever I do, it takes a whole lot of different types of human labor, like, and it's not just me, it's like all the interactions that lead up to the moment, as well as all the people that are actually involved in the projects that I'm involved in. And I think people who don't even know they're contributing to my projects are contributing to my project. So I think it's like kind of acknowledging everyone that is a part of the production of the work that I do, which is, I think, acknowledged by lots of different types of feminists and feminist economists, like the invisible labor, the labor of reproduction that we do when we take care of our houses, or when we produce food, or when we do all the labor that basically like keeps us going, like that labor is also the labor that allows the economy to exist. And so like my work, the work that actually gets shown at a museum or that like exists published on a website, like you can only really see like one tiny bit, like the top layer of what is happening. And meanwhile, so much other labor exists underneath that. And so I think like the feminist economics department was a naive way of like acknowledging that. And I loved that the acronym was the Fed, because it's like the work that exists has been fed by all these other invisible workers. And I think it's really important, and I meant to say it in response to your last question. I mean, the project of the hologram already is distributed. Like there's so many people that do the work of maintaining it. And we've been given different types of resources, which we've been able to distribute through different people, which meant that those people were able to actually like contribute meaningful work to the project. So I would say already at this point, it is distributed, and it's, I would say like carried by me, maybe 30% and 70% by a network of many other people. And I think like when we get to the point where my name can actually recede into the background and the project just exists the way we say AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and just know what it is, I think that like we will have really succeeded when it's just the hologram and people just know what it is and how to use it. And it doesn't have to be a part, you don't have to know the narrative of Cassie Thornton. It's just a thing that exists in the world and I can use it. And there's ways that I know, like I know about, like people will know about it for their own reasons because people they know did it or whatever. Yeah.
This is another link to something we were talking about in our very first session, where I was speaking with my colleagues, Aris Komprozos Athanasiou and A.T. Kingsmith. And together, the three of us, we've launched this Conspiracy Games and Counter Games project. And one of the things we're fascinated by is the power of collective fabulation. And, you know, on the negative side, we have things like the QAnon conspiracy fantasy, where, you know, people are collectively, seemingly without a sort of center or Svengali or mastermind, concocting this elaborate fantasy, which involves everything from celebrities to technology to politicians, and really like egging each other on in this kind of game that they're playing of the imagination. And I wanted to conclude our series by talking to you about, I think, a much more positive kind of conspiracy of collective fabulation, where you and the other hologrammers are, you know, coming together to sort of usher into being something out of the imagination, but something that is here to, dare I say, save the world rather than destroy it. And I want to ask about a specific methodology about that in a second, which is the way you've used LARPs and games to do that. But before I get there, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you're very clear, and your colleagues in the hologram are very clear that the hologram is not just a replacement for therapy. And you've talked about this in some ways as a kind of like growing conspiracy for a revolution, an anti-capitalist revolution. You talk about this as an anti-capitalist social technology. Why is it so important to distinguish the hologram from therapy when it is arguably very therapeutic for people who do it? I mean, they get together in their groups and they talk about the social, physical, and mental problems that are ailing them. Why isn't it just therapy? And how does it aim towards a transformation of society at large?
Well, there's so much to say about the therapy piece, but I think like to keep it really simple, like therapy is a commodity that reproduces individualism and the importance of the individual and a focus on the expert as an authority over our health. And I think models a type of like heroicism that we in the hologram are really trying to undo. And when I say that, I mean like, who isn't in so many different ways, like searching for someone who can throw them a rope to get them out of whatever tangle they're in their life. And I think like when people have been socialized around therapy, like we have learned how to rely on and get all of our help and support from like one person at a time. And that person often becomes like a lifeline for us. And that can be really beautiful and amazing and awesome and all that stuff. But also, being a person who really likes to be in a supportive role, I think that the way that like the sort of therapeutic mode, like what the therapeutic mode creates for relationships is really hard to maintain. So like I am a very willing supporter of any of my friends who have a problem, but I don't have the expertise or the energy to support them in a long-term way the way that they would need in order to achieve some sort of personal transformation, because I'm also fighting my own demons, and I'm also surviving under capitalism and have internalized my own shit from it. So I guess the way that the hologram confronts that is by showing how easy, and maybe it's not easy, how accessible it can be to receive help and support in a different way, where there are no heroes, there are no experts, and in fact, like the patient, the person seeking help, is actually the person who is powerful. They are the expert and they are the teacher. And I think that there's so many different inversions happening, and sort of like inversions and like turning inside out of what therapy is and does and teaches, that I just think it's like, it's almost in a completely different ballpark. And I guess I just want to say a little bit more about the role of the hologram in the project, because I think it really does invert the sort of relationship we have to authority and expertise in biomedicine and therapy, which is that like we really, really focus on the idea that the hologram is an expert and a teacher. And the way that we do that is by saying the person who's receiving care is the expert about their own health. No one else has been in their body. No one else has been along with them for this ride that is their life. And so they know the most about what they need and what they want. And it just is a matter of practice to figure out how to talk about those things for most of us. And so the hologram is like an amazing opportunity for that person to learn how to actually talk about themselves and what they need. And because to articulate that is not valued in our society, because really we go to the doctor so they can tell us what we need, or to the therapist. And then the second part, the hologram as a teacher, I think is really, it's an amazing thing because like articulating one's needs or expressing vulnerability is so undervalued in our society. The person that does that becomes a teacher for the people who get to witness that. So when I exist as a hologram, I show the people that are supporting me that they can also do this, and that it's not shameful. You are not a burden. You deserve support, and support wants to, like, people want to support you. And so I think that these things, they naturally sort of counter the therapeutic model. And I just think it's like the reason that the hologram, one of the reasons why the hologram is an capitalist, and I think quite revolutionary social technology, is because it just shows us that there are other options that are very different than the models that we've always existed within. And even if the hologram is not your thing, it's just like, it just shows that there, with a very small shift from the care we've always received, things can be really, really different. And I think, at least among the people that practice it, I think like we all sort of see how different things can be. And it gives us a bit of a license to reorganize. And I think the license to reorganize is part of the model that I think we can't put aside and just begin to see it as like something that helps me, because it's also something that helps me see that like other things are possible and tangible. and I guess like the thing that I hear a lot, because we teach a lot of like courses and do like lots of different types of like facilitated online stuff. So lots of different people have touched the hologram, like hundreds, maybe like we might be in the category of like 1,000 people or something that have interacted with the hologram in a kind of deep way. We hear often that people, they're like, we could really leave the politics aside. It doesn't matter because like just the practice is helping me. But I think that we will never let go of the politics, because the politics means that like we, as we are like learning these new muscles, like we're learning how to organize our own care, we're learning how to have exchange outside of money, or like actually we're learning to do stuff without exchange. We're learning to like receive and to give and to separate those two things. Like we're learning all kinds of anti-capitalist tools. But like I think the whole point is that we're actually gaining those muscles so that we can use them in other situations besides helping ourselves. And so I guess the final example that I want to say in this section is just that like we've learned that the hologram exists, I think, in two spaces simultaneously when it's the healthiest. And that is that we work in holograms, we spend a lot of time, like I spend, you know, every month or 3 months, I meet with my 3 people and we talk about me. And those 3 people meet with their 3 people and they talk about them. And then we all get together in a monthly meeting, or as many of us as can and that know about it get together and we actually talk about it. We talk about it as a model, and we talk about it as an experience, and we talk about why it's hard. We talk about augmenting it. And we have basically like a monthly organizing meeting called the Community of Practice, where maybe 20, sometimes 10, sometimes 30 people get together and we just do go rounds and talk about what it's like to use the hologram. And like, it's so important to me that we go between these like intimate spaces where we're really learning how to receive attention and care and how to ask questions. And then we go and we take those muscles and we practice them in a bigger space where we begin to learn what it's like to be a mental, emotional, social, physical being with other physical, mental, emotional, social beings. And we learn how to be vulnerable, but also how to make demands and to negotiate, because basically, like in the world that we are entering, we need to learn how to be a part of groups in different ways, how to organize and be present with our full selves, and how to potentially at times do that online, how to potentially go from online to offline, but to be able to continue to be our full selves as we negotiate for really big things around like land and water and government and incarceration. So I think like the project really is like a booster kit for getting people, for getting us, me, we, to be able to like actually organize in a different way because we have different muscles available.
Yeah, it's very inspiring, and I wanted to now also invite folks who are here in the Zoom room with us to pose questions. If you want to raise your hand, and you can appear on the screen or by voice. You can post a question in the chat. As we head into that, I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about some of the techniques that you use along with the other hologrammers, some of whom are here with us today, which is LARPing. That LARP is short for live action role playing, and this is something that I think you cooked up in collaboration with folks at Furtherfield Gallery who've been practicing LARPing for a number of years. A few months ago, you staged a live action role play where people had imagined what they would be and who they might be in a couple of decades into the future, and then showed up to a Zoom meeting, facilitated Zoom meeting, as their future selves. Why do the LARP, and what did you learn from it? A lot of what we're talking about in this institute is games and the possibilities of games to allow us to imagine different worlds, to imagine our own world differently. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think that first of all, before I talk about the LARP, I just think it's it's really interesting, just an observation that a few of us have been making, because now it is about a year, almost about a year and a quarter since the hologram has been a form that is online. So there's many people that know each other only through the hologram who've never met in person. There are people that are in like on different continents that I have never been to before, that I know now very intimately from doing lots and lots of hologram stuff together. Like, we feel in a way, I think many of us, as if we started out doing a project that was like a practice to help us in our own lives, and we entered a game. And so the hologram always was about creating a new world and creating the muscles that would help us to create a post-capitalist world. But I don't think we understood that we would actually be entering it like on accident. And so I feel like the sense right now that I get from talking to many people that practice the hologram and who stay in communication with each other, who come to community of practice, is that like we already are in an alternative reality, because we are practicing these things and honing these practices together. We're learning as we go, but like there's a sense of possibility in the whole practice, and also like a network of relationships that are new and that exist only through the hologram, that it feels like, it does feel a little bit like we're in a kind of virtual or alternative reality. And so that happened almost like as a byproduct of doing a practice online. And that exists already for so many people, I think, doing so many different things online right now. So that's already interesting, because like I almost see the hologram itself as a LARP already. Maybe I become a slightly different person in the role that I play. And maybe everybody plays a slightly different role than they already play when we enter the hologram space. Not that it isn't really exactly a space, but okay. So then the LARP that we've done was a way of solving a problem, actually. So live action role play is something that happens online, but it happens online very commonly now. It has happened online for quite some time, but it also happens in real life. And so people take on characters, and it's a sort of game of improvisation. So how do we sort of agree on a set of rules that are the rules that form a world, and then agree on a set of roles that we're going to play within that world, and then interact with each other in the world that we've agreed on. And that world might change and our roles might change, but we're all kind of developing it as we go. And so we wanted to solve a problem, which is that we wanted to make a film about the hologram with a filmmaker, and the live action role play was a way of basically creating an opportunity for people to do holograms without exposing their personal information. So we actually asked people to become their best selves, which was sort of meant as a prompt that was supposed to be sort of real and sort of funny at the same time. So we enacted our best selves now in 2020 or 2021, and then also in 2050. And the idea was that we would play the role of the person. If we all had all the support we ever needed, if we all made all the decisions we wish we made, and we had no regrets, who would we be? And we played those characters. And so the characters that we played ranged from being like very close to who we are right now to being very, very like actually an oyster. And the goal was to make a film, but also to try to imagine what it would be to practice the hologram with the same people over 30 years. So you meet with your 3 people now every month, every season, all the way now until 2050. What does that do for you? And what does that do for your society? What does it do for your community? That was the prompt of the LARP. And I think that I think whenever you take on a character and you improvise, like you become the character and the character becomes you a little bit.
Mm-hmm. we have a whole bunch of questions, which is great. So I'm gonna pose some of them to you now. So I'm gonna combine two questions here because they're both about the role of the hologram in an alienated society. And Andrew asks, what are there options in the hologram for people who don't have three people in their life who they would trust or that they can trust to be their hologram? And what role would that have for people who live in isolation, or maybe literal physical isolation or social isolation? And then to that end, Kelsey asks, throughout the term, we've been discussing the difficulty of communicating with people who believe or who are sort of in the depths of conspiracy fantasies, because one of the things that we've learned from the texts we've been reading and the people we've talked to is that a lot of the time people come to conspiracy fantasies and get attached to conspiracy fantasies because they offer a sense of community. They offer a sense of escape from alienation and meaninglessness. Because, once you get enfolded, especially in a digital age, into the conspiracy theory, you find a community, you find people who validate you, you find people who, share your worldview, you feel a sense of usefulness in the world, a sense that you understand things. So again, in the spirit of talking about the hologram in an alienated society, do you think the hologram could be useful in circumstances where, for instance, friends and family members need to talk someone out of belief in a dangerous conspiracy fantasy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the question from Andrew, like about isolation and the possibility of doing the hologram when you don't have community, I think the question comes up so much, and there's a general sense, I think, like all the time in capitalism, but especially now, many people feel alone and that they don't have access to people, especially to three people that they could really trust. And there's like many layers to a potential response, but I think one is that the goal of the project is that you can do it with many different types of people. There's a way to trust many different people to do this, because you learn as you go. As a triangle member, you're not all the responsibility isn't on you, it's on you and others. And I think the goal is that, like everybody does know a couple of people. It's just a matter of establishing the language and the trust to invite them closer to you to be able to do this. But then recognizing that so many people feel this way, we have lots of different situations come up where somebody will like take a course through the hologram, learn how to do it, and then want to do it but feel they don't have people. And so because there's a pretty big community of people who have taken the course, a lot of those people begin to sort of cross-pollinate and like be in each other's triangles and stuff like that. So that's already happening. And then I think like potentially one day we may decide to have a system in place where you can have people that are sort of free floating, who you can go online and select like the option of having someone come who is a stranger to join your hologram if you're doing it online. And so that you can have, I think, both a perspective of somebody who's way outside of your life and or fill the gap if you don't feel like you can ask all people that you know. But I think the real tension here and the real opportunity is to actually find out that you do have people around you, even though you might feel like you don't. Because I think based on my experience, everyone feels like they don't have anybody to ask. And then one day they do. And it's a matter of seeing rather than a matter of like what's actually there. And I love the question so much from Kelsey. I think that when you do the hologram, you find out, you don't just find out what people are into, you find out why. So there's many conspiracies that people participate in or believe in, or big systems that people are wedded to. And I think like the question that comes up, or that the answer that is given in the hologram is often like how did you get here? Like, why is it that you are studying what you're studying on the internet 24/7? What, like, how did you get there? How did you get to the point where you had such a distrust or such a paranoia? Like, what's underneath that? And I think the thing about the hologram, though, is that it takes time, and it's not like a one-time thing. It's like something, it's like uncovering something very gently and very slowly. And so there's nothing better, I think, than having a difficult situation where someone's latched, there's someone that's latched to an ideology and a way of doing things. There's nothing better than the hologram to sort of slowly unearth that. But also you'd have to have the buy-in from the person. And that's a whole other thing, because they have to consent and want it. And I have no doubt that some of those people underneath would love to be rescued from their ideology and their way of doing things. But for a group of people who are suffering from a major lack of trust in society, which is why they're so enmeshed in conspiracy theories, I think it's a pretty tough sell for them to trust something like this. So, yes, and how? Like
another couple of questions here, which are both sort of about how to get people into the hologram and how to grow the hologram. So Figgins, who's a game designer who's been with us through the Institute, points out that in sort of the open gaming world, which is one element of kind of the community of game designers and game players who are sharing their game designs for free, there's a kind of there's something called a protocol text, where people they point out could teach one another together, and in play, someone who has played the game before teaches other new players, or the group kind of learns the game together. And Figgins is wondering if an option like this is included in the hologram, and if it would make it improve its chances of kind of going viral, as you've been talking about. And then similarly, Cassie, who's also a game designer who's been with us through the Institute, asks kind of what's your kind of imaginary roadmap to get people involved in the hologram and get it to this sort of scale of AA, or the kind of 12-step culture, where, and specifically, like, how could the introduction of people to the process and getting people onboarded be streamlined and improved?
Yeah, such good questions. I mean, yeah, to Figgins, I mean, we have been trying to simplify the protocol. I think it took us a year basically to figure out what the protocol really was and to trust it and use it a lot. And now we really have that down. And I think we've just recently kind of written and edited a text, which I think might be like the protocol text you're talking about, for how to have your first meeting, and like what it means to kind of like play these, how to play these different roles. I would love to see what it was like to translate that to an actual game protocol, because I think it's brilliant, and I think it is like an open game, and that's what it wants to be. I think, yeah, and so in this, what we're working on right now is taking that protocol that we wrote and translating it to 10 languages and having a PDF. And I don't know, I'm curious, like, what the open game protocol looks like, and where those live, because if there's like a rebel anti-capitalist Twitch, or like a place where it can exist, like, I feel like I would so love to see what it would mean to just throw the hologram in there. And yeah, so I think like the second question about how to kind of grow the hologram and simplify the introductory process, I don't know exactly. I mean, I think at the moment we're just trying to figure out how to make it possible for more people to talk about it and to have it grow through practicing it. So, say we've hosted 4 online courses, each one had 30 people. Each of those people have 3 people that would potentially be their triangles. And then you have all the 3 people, each of those 3 people have 3 people. I think the dream was to make as many situations like that as possible so that like the thing would just kind of grow through word of mouth. And I think like we have other things happening, like a film is going to come out based on the LARP. And then there's, different sorts of, I think, things that will happen that are made by people in the community that use the hologram that will hopefully spread. But I think there isn't a big central idea for like how to grow it in a capital G way. And maybe that's okay. Like maybe it's okay if it grows slowly and through people that use it and believe in it. Or maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
A couple of more questions here. So some of the students enrolled in the class around which this institute is built were listening earlier this week to an interview you did with CS Song of KPFA's Program Against the Grain. And in that, you talked about the elements of the hologram that are parafictional. And just to back up a moment, a parafiction is a concept sort of invented by artists to describe the way that a kind of myth that spreads itself can become real. And you spoke about the hologram in some ways as a parafiction, as something that you're spreading the word about, and your co-conspirators are spreading the word about in the hopes that people will learn about it, be attracted to it, participate in it, and make it real. And you've written about parafictions about the hologram and when it sort of takes over the world in a few years. And you were talking about the LARP, where you do this kind of participatory parafiction as well, where you're sort of telling yourself a story collectively in the hopes that that story becomes real. William asks, isn't there a fundamental danger in parafictions, and points towards the QAnon conspiracy fantasy, which in some ways is this kind of completely fabulous made up story about the world, but one that comes to have very real power. So isn't parafiction kind of in some ways just another form of disinformation or misinformation? And Ashley asks a related question, which is, if the hologram is spreading through parafiction, and if, starting in 2023, it's going to be kind of a decentralized thing where there's no artist, isn't it also incredibly susceptible to people spreading misinformation or disinformation about it? Because there's no sort of central repository for official hologram information, and theoretically anyone could name themselves a participant. Yeah, 2 interesting questions about information and disinformation.
Yeah, I love those questions. I think that so I guess my response to the kind of skepticism around using parafiction, I have like 2 different thoughts. One is just that like, I don't just want like bad fantasies. I don't want to like just let people that are kind of coming up with dystopian fantasies like rule our sense of like what's possible. Or I think that there was a very good use of parafiction in the hologram, and we might be in a different era now. But I wouldn't just leave parafiction to the people, to those who are creating parafictions around like childhood sexual abuse. Like, I think we can reclaim some of these sorts of practices to create really impossibly good things as well as impossibly bad things. And I think that the example I used in that interview about Occupy Wall Street is a really important example, because like humans like to be where other humans are. So Occupy Wall Street, maybe Zuccotti Park had 20 people in it, and someone makes an augmented image of Zuccotti Park that has 400 people in it, And that means that 400 people feel like called to come, because otherwise there would just be 20 people. And so that fiction, that fictional image that was created, like actually allowed something to happen that became really important. And I think that's basically worked in the hologram. Like, I lied. And it was a really important lie to say, like, this is a practice that already exists. It is a mytho-real or mytho-real practice, practiced by many people all over the world from their couches to their beds. And because of that lie, it meant that people actually joined us. So it went from being a parafiction to a para-real project. So as I said before, there's almost a sense that we, those who are very committed and dealing and practicing the project, it's almost like we did create a parallel reality just by switching the way we talk sometimes and thinking about what it's like to redistribute care. And so I think, like, yeah, the parafiction was like the way to start the engine. And I'm not particularly worried about it. And I think, in fact, like, maybe we should do it. Like, I think we should, like, think of all the things that would, like, help. And then we should, like, lie about it until it becomes real. Like, why not? What was the second question?
Well, the second question was about if there's a risk that disinformation or misinformation about the hologram might be spread simply because it's so decentralized.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that is possible, but I think, like, something that we will aim to do, I think, in the next chunk of time, is to make something that is like our way of dealing with the intellectual property that is the hologram practice. And so that might be something like a very specific type of license that we develop that says that if you use this practice well, for good reasons to support other people and yourself in transforming, like, all blessings to you, it's going to work great. And if you use it to increase any sort of productivity or that leads to the centralizing of resources or capital, you will be damned and it will not work for you, or maybe it will transform you. I don't know. But I think that, like, in some way, I think basically the practice is pretty powerful, and I don't think it would work like kind of against itself. I think it either would transform the people who use it if they actually submit to the form, because I don't think you can really be a triangle member and truly be a narcissistic asshole or be really, like, profit driven. If you're really, really honestly able to be curious and ask questions, I think something else is possible and you will transform. And I think you cannot be, like, in the role of the hologram and be vulnerable and articulate and support the people who are supporting you if you also have, like, kind of evil motives. So I think the hologram naturally would work to transform anybody that really gave it a go. And if anybody tried to steal the project and use it in a way that we did not believe in or agree with, I'm not sure what would happen. But because it's decentralized, I guess that's the point, is that, like, there would be a bunch of people maybe trying to use it or trying to manipulate it, but it wouldn't, in a weird way, have to necessarily, like, tarnish the experience of all the others, because there's a pretty big array of people using it in different places that do or do not know each other. Yeah, I think that's the goal. That's the goal of decentralization in some ways, is that, like, it's okay if part of the ship goes down because, like, the other parts are still floating.
Cassie, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
It's been a really wonderful conversation, and it's a great way to close our summer institute.